Hey guys, tonight we're plunging headfirst into possibly the unluckiest chain reaction in history. The classic medieval oops, where one tiny mistake spirals faster than your group chat on a Friday night. This isn't just forgetting to blow out a candle or misplacing your keys. We're talking about setting in motion disasters that end with livestock invasion, angry mobs, and soup that's 60% dirt. Maybe you tripped over your own shoes and accidentally started the world's least impressive fire. Or maybe it's dropping a loaf of bread that brings down an entire plague. Before we slip on the banana peel of history, remember to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment letting me know what small mistake ruined your day, so we can all laugh our way into sleep therapy together. Now, dim those lights, set your fan to faintly ominous wind through rotting timbers, and get comfortable. Maybe tuck yourself in securely so no wild pigs or existential dread can trample you in the night. Let's warm up. Have you ever wondered if one bad decision could actually ruin your entire town? Would you trust your neighbours with fire? Would you survive on nothing but barley bread, lukewarm ale, and regret? What's the worst thing you could step in barefoot before coffee? And would you notice a plague rat if you saw one? Or would you mistake it for your cousin's cat? And now, congratulations! You've just woken up in 1349. Your pillow is made of straw. There's a draft in the roof. And something, somewhere, already smells like cheese on vacation. Good luck. It all begins with something so small, so ordinary, it barely even registers. Maybe it's an untied shoelace, if only shoelaces had been invented yet. Instead, it's a carelessly wedged log holding up the communal oven door. You're half awake and running late, heart pounding with the existential dread of being the first in line for last night's bread. And just as you nudge that log, the entire day nudges sideways with it. The grand domino effect of disaster begins, mildly inconvenient, soon to be legendary. Of course, none of this felt legendary in the moment. Standing there, the faint, ashy glow of sunrise illuminating the haphazard lean of the oven's door, you probably just grumbled. Maybe you glanced behind you to see if anyone noticed. They didn't yet. The village was still wrapped in that misty morning hush before the daily bickering about goats and barley began. Maybe you tried to fix it, a small, hopeful nudge, attempting to wedge the log back in place, but it was already too late. A telltale creak. The wooden door lurches. Something shifts inside. Loaves tumble, one falling face down on ashy coals. The smoke changes, thickens, and deep within the oven, a tiny spark finds an unexpected new friend, a dry splinter of kindling. You tell yourself it's nothing. You step back. That awkward heat gathering on your cheeks is just from the oven, you assure yourself. You try to melt into the background, but even as you walk away, people are starting to gather. First, it's old Mira, who has never missed an excuse to offer advice about anything, especially ovens. Her eyebrows rise, she clears her throat, loudly. You wince. None of this was supposed to happen. The communal oven is the village's heartbeat. Bread for everyone. Warmth for the elderly. Even that familiar place for whispered gossip and gentle ribbing. Holding up the queue wasn't just embarrassing. It was practically a public service announcement. Look at me. I'm today's cautionary tale. Behind you, people start muttering. Someone makes a joke about well done breakfast to break the tension. The air fills with a half-hearted laugh, but it's brittle. Everyone senses something's off. You wish you could offer a better distraction, but your mind keeps circling back to that moment. The way the log just sort of slipped. your left hand too sleepy to catch it, your right hand still clutching at your old felt hat. If only you'd woken up 5 minutes earlier. If only you'd been paying attention. It's funny how small errors blossom into legend. Already, word is circulating, each retelling a little more dramatic than the last. By noon, you'll hear yourself described as the hapless hero who nearly burned down breakfast for the entire village. Exaggerations will flower. The flames licked the rooftops. The bread exploded. Somebody's chicken was briefly on fire. It wasn't. But in this moment, with the acrid smell of burnt flour tainting the air, and half the village's hungry faces turning your direction, it's just you, the oven, and the mistake that started it. You offer a sheepish shrug. What else is left? All you can do is watch as more villagers crowd around, some to help, others just hungry for entertainment. A few gentle hands help right the log, and stronger arms work together to pull out the nascent ember that could have been so much worse. The morning becomes a lesson. How quickly things can slip from routine to memorable, and how sometimes the smallest nudge can turn into a story people tell for years. You will laugh about this later, around a supper table or a late harvest fire, your humiliation softening with every retelling. For now, though, you just deal with the aftermath. The halfway ruined bread, the slightly singed pride, and the strange comfort of knowing your mistake was fleeting. But your story, your very human, relatable moment, is already taking root in village memory, destined to be exaggerated and retold for generations. Let's talk breakfast. It's not eggs and bacon. It's a hunk of yesterday's bread that's so hard you could use it as a home defense weapon. You try to gnaw off a corner in the dark, but the bite forces a chunk to ricochet off the wall and land directly in the pig slop bucket. That's your breakfast gone. And because the pigs now think breakfast is served, chaos is about to commence. You don't truly understand panic until you've seen 10 pigs, plus a rogue goat, make a break for a single morsel. One by one, snouts lift, ears prick up, and suddenly the pen erupts. It's a symphony of squeals and hoofbeats. A literal stampede erupts toward the bucket. Never mind that you're still hovering over it in your pajamas, barefoot and bleary-eyed. You try to grab the bread back, but the pigs are faster, and their appetite is fueled by hope and absolute desperation. There's a strange, primal terror to being caught between hunger and the herd. On one hand, your breakfast is gone, snatched away before your day even begins. On the other hand, there's the real risk of being trampled flat by beasts you've known since they were the size of grapefruits. You consider, for a split second, leaping onto the feed trough, but it's slick with a mysterious ooze from last night's leftovers. This isn't a cartoon, and you're not about to pull off any acrobatics that early in the morning. Instead, you freeze, clutching a single crumb as chaos unfolds. The pigs circle, snuffling in the bucket, snouts rooting and tails wagging with glee. Somewhere, the goat plots its own breakfast heist, maneuvering behind you with the subtlety of a professional thief. Before you know it, the goats nibbled the end of your pajama pants. Now you're hopping on one foot, yelling more out of indignation than pain, as your dignity further unravels. This is the pivotal moment when you realize that, in the established breakfast hierarchy, you rank below both the pigs and the goat. Even the chickens, who have zero respect for anyone, cluster in the doorway, watching with sharp-eyed interest and making bets under their breath. They're waiting for the next disaster, to see if maybe, just maybe, your slipper will come off and offer them a new game piece. With breakfast lost and any plans for a peaceful morning obliterated, you fall back on the time-honored tradition of farm life, improvisation. Rooting around in the cupboards, you find a slightly less ancient heel of bread. It's just as solid as the first, but now you're wise to the pig's schemes. You tiptoe to a corner, shielding your find like it's gold. Still, the sound of bread on enamel attracts every living soul within a 2-mile radius. No one warns you when you move to the country that your mornings will be subject to such relentless attack, that every meal is a battle, and that you'll lose that battle more often than you'd like to admit. The pigs don't care about your shame. They only know that last time, bread fell from above like manna, and they keep one eye trained on you in case it happens again. Eventually, you snatch a bite from your prize, only to cough as a cloud of crumbs chokes you. The pigs, ever hopeful, surge toward you again, convinced you're about to drop another offering. You bolt, bread clutched tight as the chickens cackle and the goat gives chase. There's no peace, no dignity, not even a cup of coffee, just another absurd farmyard ballet, all before the clock strikes 7. And that's how breakfast goes. Day after day, hope, disaster, and the dream that maybe tomorrow you'll get the bread before the pigs do. Just as you dart forward to save your bread, a thundering herd of pigs barrels through the kitchen, stomping mud, tracking questionable substances, and squealing with unearned confidence. They're the medieval version of a Black Friday sale, with less hygiene. Your family's food supply for winter is now on 4 legs and headed for open pasture. For a split second, you stand there, one soggy heel of bread in hand, watching as the family pork portfolio makes its not-so-grand exit. In less time than it takes your uncle to misplace his comb, again, the pigs have bulldozed everything in their path. Buckets, brooms, and Aunt Margaret's pride. A rainbow of footprints sprawls across the flagstones, some featuring substances so mysterious that even the family dog approaches with caution. You might be tempted to blame the pigs, but let's be honest. The setup is a disaster waiting to happen. The medieval kitchen isn't exactly a fortress of food security, with no doors sturdy enough to keep out a determined snout, and walls that double as a local weather forecast, slightly damp with a chance of rodent. Your hard-won bread is merely an appetizer. The pigs, jostling and squabbling like medieval toddlers at a birthday feast, are here for the main course. And right now, that means anything that isn't tied down, including, possibly, your shoes. Outside, the parade continues. A chorus of oinks echoes down the muddy farm lane as your father brandishes a stick in an attempt to enforce some semblance of discipline. But the pigs, like seasoned escape artists, have no intention of surrendering their newfound freedom without a fight. Somewhere, your cousin has already begun naming the fastest runners. That's Lightning, and that one's Squeal a lot. Everyone seems absorbed in the livestock Olympics, except your mother, who is quietly tallying losses and sharpening her look of disappointment. Here's a fun fact. Pigs, in medieval times, aren't just livestock. They're both piggy banks and garbage disposals, insurance policies on hooves. When a pig goes missing, it's like waking up to discover half your savings account grew legs and left for greener pastures. The whole community feels it too. Villages sometimes share pigs between families, and tracking down a lost one occasionally calls for the medieval version of an Amber Alert. It's not unusual to see townsfolk forming impromptu search parties, waving stale loaves and sloshing through puddles, all for a chance at reclaiming tomorrow's bacon. Back in the kitchen, you join the growing recovery effort. There's bread to mop up, troughs to refill, and elaborate traps to design, mostly involving buckets and wishful thinking. You try, and fail, to reason with the smallest piglet, who stares back at you as if to say, "Not today, friend." The little escape artist wiggles free with the self-assured swagger of someone who knows tomorrow's leftovers are already within snout's reach. Let's not forget the sensory delights. The air is thick with a heady blend of pig musk, overturned ale, and the faint hint of singed goose feather from last night's dinner. An aromatic cocktail that lingers long afterwards. Somewhere, a neighbour yells something about trespassing swine. Your chores just got longer by 3 disgruntled visits, and at least one awkward apology. By nightfall, the pigs, bellies round and spirits high, return home of their own accord, trotting back in single file like rowdy house guests who only vaguely recall the party rules. Your father chalks up the day as a lesson in humility. Your mother patches holes in the bread rations, and you, exhausted and a little amused, find solace in the fact that, at least this time, the pigs came home. Tomorrow, it's back to business, locking up the food, counting the pigs, and preparing for the next parade. Let me know if you'd like this tweaked further or split into voiced sections for audio-visual pacing. It's not just your kitchen that's a war zone. As you trip over a piglet, your mother's legendary cabbage soup, simmering since sunup, launches across the room. The splash radius takes out both your last onion and the neighbour's only clean shirt. You'll be smelling that soup until next Michaelmas. You might think soup is harmless, humble even, but that doesn't reckon with the reality of medieval kitchens, where every pot on the fire is less of a culinary project and more of a loaded trebuchet, waiting for the merest tremor to go off. In a flash, the soup splatter paints an abstract masterpiece across the table, the walls, and, most regrettably, the family dog. You catch a whiff and are instantly reminded of every meal you've ever eaten. At this point, you resign yourself to living with the new scent, as cabbage and turnip perfume is the height of peasant chic. Your mother's reaction is swift and fierce. She's already wielding her wooden spoon like a general marshalling her troops to battle. Her glare alone sharpens your senses. With a sigh worthy of a martyr, she gathers rags to begin the cleanup, all while muttering about the demon piglet and waste of onions. As you mop the floor, you spot the culprit piglet trotting away with a sprig of parsley in its jaw, utterly unbothered by the chaos it just created. And of course, there's always an audience. The neighbour, still clutching his formerly clean shirt, is torn between outrage and amusement. He starts recounting the entire disaster to the growing crowd outside the cottage door, embellishing slightly with each retelling. The soup flew so high it nearly scalped young Tom's head clean off. Before long, the story morphs into something worthy of a place in the village chronicles, a feat of klutziness whispered about in awe by small children. It's not just soup you've lost. The afternoon supper is ruined. The onion, your crown jewel, your one real foray into luxury for the week, lies in a mushy heap, out of reach and out of mind. The loss is keenly felt. Your younger siblings emerge from their respective hiding spots, noses twitching at the lingering scent, faces crumpling when they realize dinner is now whatever we can scrape up. This is the universal heartache of the peasant household. One slip, and a day's work is dashed. But nothing brings a medieval village together quite like disaster. Soon the neighbour's wife arrives, cackling and waving a spare shirt. She has plenty, she assures you. And besides, this one was old anyway. Uncle Bert saunters in, drawn by the commotion and perhaps by the faint hope of free soup. He leaves with only a slightly cabbage-scented beard for his troubles. By the time the commotion fades, half the village has stopped by to witness the aftermath and offer advice or just nosy commentary about proper livestock containment and newfangled stew-thickening techniques. In a small way, the chaos feels like a relief. For a little while, the pressure of the day, chores, hunger, worry, melts under the laughter and mock-serious admonishments. the story of the legendary soup spill becomes a running joke, a shorthand for all the ways life in your tiny world teeters on the absurd. Tomorrow the kitchen floor will still be sticky, and your mother's temper will need soothing. But today, at least, everyone's misery smells equally of cabbage. As dusk settles and the last neighbour straggles home, you scrape together a salvaged meal, grateful for whatever didn't hit the floor. Over bowls of bread-thick broth, there's a sense of solidarity, or maybe just resignation. Because if there's one thing you learn out here, it's this. A good story is almost as important as a good meal, and sometimes you only get one or the other. At least you'll be remembered, not for your cooking necessarily, but for the soup heard round the town. With hot soup now glued to your outfit and time ticking away, you're forced to grab your emergency tunic, the one with more holes than fabric and a suspicious stain you hope is just beetroot. You consider if it's better to look ridiculous or catch hypothermia. Practicality wins. Style loses. But as you stand before the smoky mirror, which, let's face it, is really just a polished bit of old shield, you confront the fashion dilemma facing every feudal townsperson before a banquet or market day. What do I do when disaster strikes my only nice tunic? The medieval wardrobe wasn't bursting with options. There was no walk-in closet, no rows of colour-coordinated outfits. If you were lucky, you had 2 changes of clothes, one for feast days and one for rolling in mud. Today, both are out of commission. You might briefly consider borrowing your neighbour's formal attire. But remember, medieval communal living meant you already know it's been through at least 2 pigpen cleanings, and that fragrant scent is here to stay. Or perhaps you could try and patch the holes, but needle and thread are about as scarce as compliments about your hygiene. Anyone who manages halfway decent stitches immediately winds up drafted by the local lord to fix the banners, or worse, the chainmail. So in your holy, now slightly lopsided tunic, you venture out, hoping against hope that feudal fashion is more forgiving than history suggests. Ironically, while everyone feared sumptuary laws dictating who could wear what fabrics and colours, no decree could ever legislate away that telltale soup splotch mark. Social hierarchy might depend on cloth and cut, but it was the stains that told the true story. A hint of pea soup here, a sign of last week's bread pudding there. Forget Instagram feeds. Wardrobe mishaps in the Middle Ages were a walking chronicle of your culinary adventures. If your emergency tunic is a vivid shade of yellow, you might brace yourself for side-eye from the town's sumptuary inspector, the original fashion police. Just hope you're not caught in silk without a noble title, or worse, found in anything resembling purple. While you personally don't see the harm in cheery colours, the local authorities believe one ill-timed burst of sartorial self-expression could undermine the entire fabric of society, pun intended. The last thing anyone needs on a stressful day is accusations of social climbing, especially if you're literally climbing up the scaffolding later to hang tapestries. It's not just the upper classes who fret about fashion rules. Among peasants, creativity in clothing was less about standing out and more about survival. The humble tunic doubled as workwear, sleepwear, and emergency blanket. Repairs were made on the fly, with whatever was at hand. Moss for padding, twine for lacing, and if things got really desperate, a well-placed hunk of bread could double as a button. Don't ask what happens if you get hungry. Periodic rain showers gave everyone a tie-dye effect, and anything intentionally distressed was more out of necessity than any sense of cool rebellion. Of course, fashion emergencies often struck when you could least afford them. Just before harvest festivals, or the annual visit from the local lord. Here, quick thinking was essential. Maybe you'd trade last season's shrunk-in-the-wash shawl with your cousin for their slightly less ragged hat. Or, if you lived dangerously, strategically drape a cloak and hope no one asked you to sit by the fire where you'd have to remove it. Ultimately, you take solace in camaraderie. After all, in a community where everyone's closet is more disaster than designer, there's something comforting in collective embarrassment. Tomorrow's gossip won't be about your stains or holes, but about the surreptitious swap you pulled off with the baker's son, or the impromptu fashion advice you traded for a chunk of cheese. So, with your emergency tunic, patched pride, and irrepressible spirit, you march on, one soup-stained, spirit-lifting, fashion emergency at a time. In the feudal world, survival isn't always stylish, but at least it makes for a memorable story. Now it's time for your walk to the village square. Soup stains, torn tunic, and all. Every neighbour you pass offers advice you didn't ask for. The local wise woman crosses herself as you approach. Your morning jog is now a walk of shame with the added soundtrack of children snickering under their breath. You clutch your tattered belongings, trying to shift your satchel to cover the worst of the soup splatter. But it's no use. The stain has taken on a life of its own, spreading across your clothes like an ominous map. Old Jorgen the cobbler leans out of his window, chewing a sprig of some mysterious herb, and calls out, "You should have tried goat milk. Gets stains right out." He says this as if you'd stopped by for fashion advice, not simply trying to survive the day. You muster a tight smile but keep your eyes fixed ahead. Past the bakery, the scent of fresh bread mocks your empty stomach. Marion, the baker's wife, waves a floury hand and smirks. Did you pick a fight with breakfast again? You try to laugh it off, though you feel the heat rising on your cheeks. Even the village dog, who just yesterday danced in your shadow, won't come near you now, skittering away as if embarrassment might be contagious. Children line the street, abandon their games for a better show. They whisper with cupped hands, and you catch bits of cruel creativity floating on the breeze. Looks like she wrestled a cauldron and lost. Maybe he's starting a new trend, peas and tunic. Every step you take is soundtracked by their suppressed giggles and the occasional jeer from the braver ones. You tell yourself it can't get worse, but then you spot Matilda, your eternally unimpressed neighbour, standing guard at her gate. Her arms folded, brow arched, with all the judgment of a magistrate. "Leaving the house like that," she says, voice cutting through the morning air like a scythe. "Some people really have no pride." She waits for a reply, but you're busy calculating how much of your dignity she just sliced off. You pass the well, the heart of village gossip, where three sisters hold court. Their conversation pauses as you approach, replaced by synchronized tuts and pointed stares, their heads turning like sunflowers tracking a particularly juicy scandal. Saw them heading to the square. One whispers into her sister's ear, loud enough for you to catch. What's the world coming to? For a fleeting moment, you wonder what it would be like to vanish, disappear into a wisp of breeze, never to be questioned about your sartorial choices or kitchen disasters again. As you round the last bend, the market comes into view. The crowd is gathered for the weekly announcements, and all eyes swing towards you, hunger for novelty apparent in each stare. Some burly farmer mumbles, "Looks like someone's had an adventure," and the laughter that follows washes over you, more stinging than any physical blow. You square your shoulders, grip your satchel tighter, and remind yourself that eventually even this storm of humiliation will pass. Still, there's a stubborn strength in the act, putting one foot in front of the other, facing the crowd with soup-stained pride. You tell yourself that in a week or a month, this day will be an anecdote, a cautionary tale, or with luck, a source of village legend. For now, though, you're forced to bear witness to every reaction, every whispered jab, every sidelong glance that seems to shout, "There goes the one who fought breakfast and lost." You finally reach the square battered but unbroken and take your place among your neighbours. The sting of humiliation remains, but deep beneath, something else is simmering. The knowledge that you survived this gauntlet, and tomorrow you'll walk these streets a little taller, even if you're still dodging the occasional pea. Arriving at the market, you set up shop with your modest offering: 3 onions, 1 slightly traumatized chicken, and whatever dignity you have left. Of course, the chicken chooses this moment to stage an escape attempt, looping around your ankles and knocking over the entire basket. Not your best entrepreneurial hour. Onlookers, already skilled practitioners in the art of schadenfreude, offer running commentary as you lunge, weave, and eventually belly flop in pursuit of the wayward poultry. "That's no way to run a business," one vendor chortles, pausing between sales of suspiciously dent tomatoes. You want to retort, something about his tomatoes being older than you are, but you're busy recapturing honour and your dinner, flapping down the muddy lane. In the process, your onions roll away, commandeered by a gang of prowl street urchins who melt into the crowd, triumphant. You're left clutching a feather, vaguely resembling a failed conjuring act. With deep breaths and whatever remains of your sense of humour, you reassemble your stall, really more a pile of misfortune than a display. The chicken, glaring at you with the quiet contempt of the recently bested, now sits tethered, plotting. You try to drum up enthusiasm for the day's wares, attempting pitch lines, borrowed from the more bombastic sellers. 3 onions, 1 anxious chicken, yours for a fair price. A woman with a weather-beaten face pauses, squints at your onion, then at your chicken, and gives you a sympathetic head tilt. She offers you 2 pennies for the lot. You try to haggle, invoking a charm you're certain you don't possess. She ups it to 3, only to immediately drop to 1 after the chicken resumes its mutinous squawking. Sellers nearby are hawking everything from embroidered shawls to jars of honey so viscous it barely exits the jar. Their calls are confident, assured, a clashing symphony of hope. You, meanwhile, try not to shout over the chicken's ongoing protest. A child stops by, eyeing the chicken with a kind of reverence usually reserved for saints and sweets. "Does it lay golden eggs?" he whispers, hopeful. "Only if you believe very hard," you reply. Deciding now is as good a time as any for pure fiction. The child looks disappointed and wanders off, leaving you alone with your thoughts and a slight existential crisis. Time inches by. The sun arcs higher, the market thrums with commerce, and your onions begin to wilt in solidarity with your morale. You try tactics. You arrange your onions in a triangle, then a line, then a smiley face, none of which proves compelling enough to merit cash. You overhear a vendor referring to you as that one with the dramatic poultry. The moniker sticks. It draws a few curious glances, but nobody reaches for their coin purse. Suddenly, a well-dressed merchant, new shoes gleaming and pockets heavy with the day's takings, strolls by. He eyes the chicken, appears to weigh its comedic potential, and after a long pause asks, "Does it bite?" The chicken chooses this moment to glare, as if considering its answer. You assure him it does not, omitting recent evidence. The merchant, with a theatrical sigh, offers to buy the chicken, not for eating, but to amuse his children. Reluctant, but desperate, you agree. The onion sale, you sense, is merely a bonus at this point. Coins change hands, enough to recoup your pride, just barely. Your onions follow, destined for someone else's stew. As you pack up your now empty basket, missing the chaos of your mercurial chicken a little more than you'd care to admit, you can't help but smile. It's not the sale you dreamed of, nor the fortune you hoped for, but it is a story. And in this market, today, perhaps that's the best currency you have. Let me know if you'd like any tweaks to align even further with a specific segment from your transcripts. Just as you go to recover your produce, Old Man Stevenson, local legend, 80 years old, and sharper than a turnip, casually pockets your largest onion. He maintains unbroken eye contact. No one challenges him, because he once bit a wolf. At this point, you let it slide. Honestly, the onion probably needed a break from you. There's a hush over the market stall, like everyone is waiting to see if you'll speak up. But how can you? This is Old Man Stevenson, whose daily walk has the solemnity of a parade. He says things like, "Back in my day, onions brought men together and tore them apart, and people nod, even if they have no idea what he means. With a flourish only an octogenarian onion thief could muster, he tucks your prized allium into his weathered coat and tips his hat. That's his signature move. Nobody's ever retrieved an onion after the hat tip, and today is no exception." Nearby, Mrs. Kluger gasps, part scandalized, part impressed, then returns to scrutinizing your parsnips with suspicion. You wonder if she's plotting her own root vegetable caper. But she's no Stevenson. No one is. The market resumes its regular murmur, as if scenes like this are part of the agreed-upon rhythm of community life. Stevenson's crime will go down in the annals of local produce law, alongside the Great Carrot Exchange of '96 and the rutabaga misunderstanding of '03. You're tempted to pursue Stevenson, if only to reclaim some dignity, but reason prevails. This is more than a theft, it's a performance. Stevenson moves between stalls like a folk hero, a figure possessed by equal parts mischief and gravitas. The children follow at a distance, whispering, "Did you see? He took it right in front of everyone." A pair of elders on a nearby bench pass judgment in silence, communicating telepathically in the ancient dialect of the perpetually unimpressed. In the aftermath, you examine the empty space where your onion once sat. Was it all just an elaborate lesson in humility? Possibly. You reflect on the onion itself. Perfectly purple, heirloom, grown under circumstances so precise they'd make a wine sommelier weep. You think, perhaps Stevenson knows the true value of a good onion, or perhaps he just likes the chase. That night, Stevenson's legend grows. You hear stories echoing across the square, how he allegedly traded the onion for a rare coin, or used it to win back his stolen lawn flamingo. One tale claims the onion was merely a decoy for a secret cheese smuggling operation. The market thrives on hyperbole, each telling more outlandish than the last, and somewhere in the mix, the details of your onion's origin become inseparable from the story itself. You realize you're now part of this law, albeit as the straight man to Stevenson's mischief. The next morning, you find, resting atop your stall, a note scrawled in looping cursive. "He who clings to onions finds only tears. S." Attached is a single smaller onion, not yours but a peace offering of sorts. You stifle a laugh. The whole affair feels like an initiation. Market veterans nod knowingly as you show them the note, and for the first time, you sense a quiet kinship in their shared smirks. Old Man Stevenson passes by just once the whole day. He says nothing, but as he spares you a glance, his wink says it all. You've entered a new chapter in your market story, one writ in onions, pride, and a little bit of well-earned humility. Because at the end of the day, you realize every crop has its season, and every onion has its thief. You try to make change for a neighbor buying the last of your sad apples, but the only coins in your pouch are foreign, bent, or possibly buttons masquerading as money. The village banking system, as reliable as a wooden umbrella. If medieval banking had a slogan, it would probably be "good luck," which is exactly what you'd need if you wanted to store, borrow, or even count your money. In this world, coins drifted through villages like lost travelers. Venetian ducats, French deniers, maybe something with a too smug-looking king stamped onto it. None of them matched in size, weight, or value, so every transaction was a miniature drama. Want to pay for your bread with a coin from the next duchy? The baker squints, bites it, and then demands a chicken instead. Villagers had a basic approach to finance. Hide your wealth under the mattress, thatch roof, or, for the especially sophisticated, bury it under the pigsty. The idea of lending or investing was roughly as popular as bathing in January. Yet somehow, merchants and tradespeople found ways to muddle through. Local moneylenders, sometimes dressed as monks, sometimes not, offered loans, but these came with interest rates that felt less like business and more like medieval torture. You might hear that the bank was open for lending, but bank often meant the back room of the local tavern, a mug of ale, and a handshake that doubled as a vague legal contract. Count on any official banking system? Hardly. International merchants took to carrying scribbled notes, early, awkward versions of promissory notes, better known as IOUs. These were supposed to guarantee payment, but only if the person you handed it to knew your cousin in Florence or your uncle in Bruges. If not, you'd be better off offering them a handful of decent turnips. Trust was both the glue and the grease of the medieval banking system. Everyone trusted old Marta, whose scales were at least mostly accurate, never mind last winter's lead apple incident. If you needed to send money to a relative in another town, you could try a travelling merchant, who might, if the weather and bandits cooperated, deliver your coins for a commission that made you wish you'd taken the risk yourself. And don't forget, at any time, a new lord could ride through town and declare all your coins obsolete, replacing them with shiny new ones, conveniently stamped with his own profile and worth exactly as much as he said. Everyone's savings, instantly downgraded to metal knickknacks. For the rare few with large sums to safeguard, nobles, prosperous merchants, or the church, money could go to semi-official banks in the big cities. These were about as stable as the weather, periodically collapsing due to war, poor investments, or the owner deciding he'd prefer a life at sea. Depositors could show up to retrieve their life savings, only to be met with a shrug, an apology, and sometimes a mob already rioting for the same reason. Despite all this, commerce chugged along, markets bustled, debts were written on scraps of parchment or remembered by stern matrons, and families managed to scrape by on a mix of hope, barter, and the occasional miracle. If you wanted a lesson in resilience and improvisation, you'd find no better school than a medieval town square, where the clink of mismatched coins and the laughter of deal-making echoed under the uncertain eye of fate itself. In short, medieval banking was less system and more collaborative storytelling exercise, subject to the whims of fate, weather, and the sharp eyes of your fellow townsfolk. And should you ever lose your last real coin, at least you'll still have a nice collection of buttons and a valuable lesson in the true meaning of wealth. As you struggle with math, market gossip explodes. Someone suggests you've been hexed by a witch. Another claims the soup stain is a sign of the apocalypse. Your slip-up is the town's top headline. Careful, by sundown, you might be history's worst scapegoat. By midday, Your mistake has travelled farther than your best ever calculation. Old Mrs. Hartley is already squinting at you from behind the pickle barrels, whispering too loudly that you never trusted anyone who couldn't add up onions. Her friend, Mr. Feldman, nods sagely and offers a new theory. Math errors are contagious. Give it a week, the children will be multiplying apples by moonlight. Suddenly, parents shoo their offspring indoors as you pass, yanking them away from invisible danger. Your faulty arithmetic, apparently now a municipal threat. You cling to your now cold math worksheet like a shield. What began as a simple error has transformed, via the endless creativity of bored townspeople, into a minor catastrophe. Rumours stretch, twist, and sprout new heads like a hydra. Someone says you cursed the crops. Ever since the soup stain, did you notice the carrots aren't quite as crisp? While another swears up and down, they saw you muttering forbidden numbers at the wishing well. Doesn't take much, sneers the butcher's apprentice, ostentatiously counting out change extra slowly. Last time, it was the mayor's cat, remember that? Suddenly the conversation is less about numbers, more about what people wish the numbers could explain. Bad luck, cracked mirrors, strange dreams, that funny taste in the bread. By early afternoon, your name has blended with every recent calamity. A catch-all explanation like bad weather, but more fun to blame. A group of old women wheel their carts into a tight cluster and debate. Perhaps you're unlucky, or simply careless, but what if it's darker than that? Could be a curse, whispers one, clutching her shawl. Or the sign of a coming plague. They regard you with the suspicion usually saved for out-of-season strawberries. Even the dogs begin to treat you differently, barking as you approach, weaving a chorus of accusation. You try to set the record straight. It was just a mistake. Anyone could have miscounted the bread loaves. But facts are a slow, lumbering beast, ruled and outpaced by rumours, which are quicksilver and everywhere at once. The more you talk, the more convincing your accusers sound. The grocer's assistant pipes up with, "That's just what someone hexed would say." And before you know it, there's an actual, unofficial inquiry underway. Neighbours speculating, tallying sightings of odd behaviour, scrutinising your every move. You set down your book bag and someone whispers, "Look, she won't even carry numbers now." Meanwhile, as the sun dips west, the marketplace tilts from idle curiosity into full theatrical rumour-mongering. Someone launches a dramatic retelling. This time, instead of just struggling with sums, you summoned a rain of frogs after sneezing at the register. The initial soup stain has become a kind of relic. Children try to sneak a peek, hoping for proof of supernatural origins. Even your allies keep their distance, calculating the social risk of siding with the suspected hexbringer. With every passing hour, reality frays at the edges. Rumours, accusations, tall tales, they coalesce into a shimmering, shifting truth that's hard to pin down or fight. Facing the collective will of a town desperate for excitement, you find yourself at the centre of a storm. A scapegoat, unwitting, undeserving, but perfectly positioned for the role. By nightfall, you understand, logic is no match for the hunger of a good story, especially when it offers someone, anyone, to blame. Watch your step. In a town that thrives on gossip, redemption often requires more than clearing your name. Sometimes it means rewriting the story entirely, one quieter conversation at a time. But for now, as dusk settles and the whispers persevere, you brace yourself for whatever wild accusation tomorrow might bring. In an effort to clean up, you accidentally nudge a lantern off the makeshift table. It lands in a mound of hay, and within seconds, the square is more lit than a modern influencer's Instagram feed. Cue villagers with buckets of water, ale, or just mild disappointment. As the flames leap uninvited into the evening air, your mind races through possible next steps. On the one hand, you could make a mad dash for the nearest well and hope that medieval firefighting techniques involve something more than shouting and wringing one's hands. On the other, you could try to organize the chaos, herding able-bodied townsfolk into something resembling a bucket brigade, even if half the buckets are currently filled with last night's lukewarm ale. Regardless, it's too late to slip away and pretend you were never here. One of the more alert villagers locks eyes with you. The message is clear. This is, quite obviously, your mess to fix. The crowd splits in two. Half are genuinely concerned, darting about with water, sacks of earth, or whatever else they can scrape together. The other half seem more preoccupied with using this unexpected fire as a break from the monotony, gathering around with mild curiosity, sense of drama, and a sprinkling of nosiness. You spot the local blacksmith bellowing instructions in a voice that could shatter glass, or at least rattle a few chickens. His directions, of course, are more confusing than helpful. Get the water. Not that water. The other water. It turns out, differentiating between potable and not so potable water is not just a modern preoccupation. Smoke spirals upwards, setting off a chain reaction among the livestock. Chickens scatter in every direction. Pigs snort in protest. And at least one goat manages to find a vantage point from which to judge your life choices. In the midst of this, you channel your inner optimist. At least it's not raining, you think, only to realize that rain might have been the answer everyone's looking for, if less convenient for your shoes. Miraculously, some progress is made. People form a loose line from the well, passing along buckets with a speed born of panic rather than practice. You manage to get into the rhythm, passing along wooden pails, sometimes splashing half their contents onto yourself and those around you. It is messy, it is noisy, and it is deeply collaborative in a way that only absolute necessity can inspire. Nearby, a few enterprising villagers have grabbed cloaks and wet rags to try to smother the smaller flames. The fabric smokes and sizzles, but for every patch of fire beaten down, another seems to spring up elsewhere. The local baker, whom you last saw rescuing loaves from an overzealous apprentice, now wields a sopping burlap sack, determined to save his own window display from joining the pyre. There's a brief exchange with the local herbalist who, having sprinkled what she claims are protective herbs around the fire's perimeter, offers you a sprig of something pungent for luck and courage. You accept, despite not being entirely convinced it will do anything beyond mask the smell of burnt hay. Gradually, the flames succumb to the villagers' collective effort. The smoke lessens, the frantic shouts become tired murmurs, and even the animals settle into resentful silence. You stand in the centre of the charred square, clutching a badly dented bucket, soot-streaked but mostly intact. A villager pats you on the back, leaving a handprint in the ash. And just as the relief settles in, someone mutters, "Could have been worse. At least you didn't set fire to the cheese stall." Laughter ripples through the crowd. You breathe out, equal parts embarrassment and gratitude. If nothing else, you've provided an evening's entertainment and a new cautionary tale for future harvest festivals. Congratulations. You survived the fire, and more importantly, the disapproving looks from an entire village. When the bucket brigade's water turns out mostly to be weak ale and someone's leftover fish stew, you realise disaster response wasn't exactly a medieval strong suit. The crispy hay now smells like bruised hops and lost hope. If you'd lived in almost any medieval town, you'd have known what a looming fire meant. Not just the threat of flames, but the certainty that on the best of days, absolutely nothing was ready for it. People didn't have fire trucks, nor even standardised buckets. Half the time, you'd be trying to save a barn with a repurposed cooking pot. And if you think that's a little chaotic, remember that the actual water supply was a patchy thing at best. Deep wells weren't always convenient. Surface water was usually contaminated with a cocktail of waste, runoff, and, on Thursdays, possibly mysterious frothy substances of unknown origin. It's no wonder then that when the call went up, fire. The most common response wasn't heroism, but pragmatic despair. While in modern times we might fret about drought conditions while sipping bottled water, in medieval times, water, drinkable or not, was always precious and rarely where you needed it. The bucket brigade system, hastily assembled neighbours passing anything vaguely picture-shaped, became the laughably ineffective frontline defence. And since most people's buckets doubled as beer-brewing tools, the handoff got sticky, literally and figuratively. But why was this water shortage so disastrous? First, timber and thatch burn with an enthusiasm that today's pyromaniacs would envy. Once a fire took hold, and without an immediate deluge to suppress it, entire neighbourhoods could vanish in a night. The City of London burned spectacularly more than once before anyone thought to make actual plans, and rural settlements were forever at the mercy of sparks, dry spells, and a strong wind. Part of the problem came down to infrastructure, or, more accurately, the medieval lack thereof. Many towns were built long before anyone gave a thought to fire safety, plumbing, or even waste management. Wells might be miles away, and water carts, if a hamlet even had one, were reserved for essential farming or brewing. The idea of keeping a permanent water store near at-risk areas. The only thing medieval officials stockpiled was excuses. And here, an unexpected twist. While the nobles might own fancy stone keeps and spacious courtyards, their serfs and tenants still squabbled over murky waterholes. It was, ironically, safer to drink the weak ale or cider than to risk dysentery from open wells. Hence, the oddity of a water brigade arriving with more alcohol than actual water. This blend of necessity and improvisation leaves us with the enduring image of firefighting by way of slightly sour, faintly fishy liquids. Modern readers might sneer at the incompetence or creativity of our predecessors, but it's worth remembering that all their ingenuity had to work with was whatever was at hand. If the well was low in September, hope you liked scorched earth aesthetic for your full wardrobe. No running water meant the fight was always uphill, and so fire's real triumph was psychological. It reminded everyone just how fragile normal life could be. Over time, of course, towns did begin investing in firefighting measures, some even developing primitive fire engines and public cisterns. But those innovations crawled onto the scene centuries after countless villages smouldered in defeat. For much of the Middle Ages, the aftermath of a fire was less about relief and more about grieving for the collective failure, and perhaps, if you survived, vowing to hang on to your last jug of slightly cleaner ale for next time. So, while today's water crises make major headlines and spark heated debates, let's spare a thought for the old bucket brigade, valiantly sloshing pints of disappointment onto a blaze. Because in the medieval world, water shortages weren't just an inconvenience, they were the difference between a late summer barbecue and a full-on town barbecue, with no one particularly amused by the punchline. The fire's out, sort of, but not before an impromptu gathering of every irritated villager who didn't need more drama today. They vote on what punishment fits the crime: stocks, public ridicule, or being the new official village fire watcher with no lanterns. Democracy, medieval edition. Now, there are rules to these gatherings, even if no one would ever admit it. First, everyone must arrive at the village square looking suitably frazzled. Bonus points for dramatic soot stains or flour-dusted aprons. If you've lost a chicken in the confusion, even better. Carry it around for added sympathy and the chance to interject your poultry grievance at every lull in the shouting. Once assembled, the real business begins. Huffing, tutting, murmuring in increasingly conspiratorial tones. There's always one villager, reliable as rainfall, who takes it upon themselves to shout, "This never would have happened if old Jurgen was still in charge," even if old Jurgen famously once set the thatch ablaze trying to smoke out a squirrel. Tradition, after all, has its own selective memory. The accuser, of course, must express their outrage with the right blend of wounded innocence and barely suppressed glee. After all, today's accused is tomorrow's juror. Etiquette dictates you pace, gesture broadly, and point at random pockets of smoke as if they hold the solution. The bucket brigade leader gives their rant about water conservation and moral decay. Children weave between legs, trying to eavesdrop for the best bits to repeat later, ideally within earshot of their parents. The actual punishment debate follows strict, unwritten guidelines. Stocks always gets an enthusiastic initial vote, especially from those who feel their own grievances could use a little public theatre. Public ridicule is pitched by the resident wit, someone's uncle, invariably, who revels in the chance to test out new material. The firewatcher position, more curse than roll, is reserved for the truly unlucky or particularly unpopular. Secret ballots are for future centuries. Here, it's a show of hands and the loudest shouts win. Meanwhile, etiquette demands that anyone with a minor injury from the fire parade, it like a battle wound, regardless of severity. A singed eyebrow is leverage. A sprained ankle is a tragic epic. Expect dramatic hobbling, detailed retellings, and, for the especially theatrical, spontaneous fainting. Not participating in this ritual of exaggeration is a faux pas. You risk being seen as uninvested, or worse, suspiciously competent. At the periphery, the wise old crones exchange knowing nods. They've seen mobs with better organisation, but rarely with more enthusiasm. Occasionally, one intervenes with an anecdote about the great fire of 12-something or other, which derails the process just long enough for everyone to catch their breath and remember that really, no one wants to rebuild the north fence again. Gradually, consensus is hammered out, not through logic, but by attrition. As the novelty wanes and the initial anger fades, the crowd drifts toward their original tasks. The miller remembers there's bread to burn. The blacksmith is lured away by the scent of overcooked mutton. And the village children, no longer supervised, initiate the world's least regulated game of chase the goose. Before dispersing, etiquette insists on at least one magnanimous gesture. Someone proposes leaving last night's bread and a jug of the weakest cider at the door of the accused. "It's just tradition," someone says gruffly, conveniently forgetting that last year's accused received a boot to the head instead. Forgiveness is as ritualized as outrage, a delicate balance that ensures no one is banished for long, and tomorrow's disagreements have enough participants. By dusk, angry mob etiquette has done its job. An elaborate, often ridiculous dance, but the village is soothed, the unfortunate firewatcher appointed, begrudgingly, and everyone gets a story to share for the next fortnight. In swoops the mayor, whose primary job is impressive hat-wearing and catastrophic speech-making. He promises swift justice, better soup safety, and a reduction in roving pig incidents by next winter. You nod along, because what else can you do? He steps onto the makeshift platform in the town square. A wobbly stack of crates, painted with the town colours, and last used for a pie-eating contest. He clears his throat. The hat, today, is a glorious affair, broad-brimmed, feathered, and ever so slightly askew, currently drawing more attention from the crowd than any actual words he might utter. He extends his arms in a grand gesture, as if about to conjure a parade from thin air. "Fellow citizens," he begins, pausing for dramatic effect. It has come to my attention that recent events have caused. A lengthy search for the right word ensues, his gaze flitting across the gathering. A soup crisis, he finally declares. A collective gasp ripples outward, though whether at the crisis or the absurdity of the phrase is unclear. The mayor's speeches are less about what he says, few recall details 5 minutes later, and more about how he says them. Every sentence is punctuated with the kind of pauses that suggest the world may end if you look away. His vow for better soup safety is met with scattered applause, mainly from Mrs. Crandall, who's hoping for compensation over her scalded toe incident, and from a handful of local children who are hoping for more adventures involving running through the village with ladles. He continues, "It is the solemn duty of this office, and thus of my hat, to ensure the well-being and safety of our town's soups, stews, and consumable liquids." A pigeon settles atop a lamppost and regards the proceedings with skeptical interest. The mayor, perceiving this as an encouraging omen, soldiers on, "Swift justice will prevail." His voice swells, echoing against the bakery. "We shall catch the criminal, whether human or beast, and bring them to account." This declaration brings murmurs from the throng, some certain it was the butcher's apprentice, others suspecting Farmer Dilly's prize-winning pig, Gertrude. The mayor pivots abruptly to his boldest promise yet, "And by next winter, you have my word, the population of roving pigs will be cut in half." Cheers erupt, though someone at the back queries whether this refers to actual pigs or simply pigs on the move. The mayor gestures vaguely, a technique honed over years of avoiding specifics. As the speech rolls onward, it becomes less a matter of civic leadership and more a masterclass in distraction. The mayor alludes to mysterious, outside experts called in from the next village over, whose qualifications, he assures everyone, are impeccable and nearly relevant. He praises the valiant soup makers, the steadfast lid closers, and the unsung heroes who patrol with spoons. He deftly skips over the early morning kitchen fire and last week's unfortunate pea soup rebellion, his rhetorical hat trick being to mention nothing while appearing to mention everything. By now, the townsfolk are settling into their usual post-speech moods, some faintly reassured, others planning to double-bolt their kitchens, and a few already excited for the inevitable town newsletter recap. The mayor, sensing the closing flourish approaching, raises his hat in respect to the audience, nearly losing it to the wind. "We stand together, citizens," he proclaims, "united against chaos, pork, and poorly secured stockpots." He steps down, triumphant, to a mixture of polite clapping and frantic livestock tallying. The square begins to empty, conversations swirling about investigations, stew fortification practices, and new theories on pig motivation. Only the pigeon remains on the lamppost, unpersuaded but marginally entertained. And as you depart with the crowd, you realise the mayor may have changed nothing, but at least he did it with style. The town would accept no less. After the mayor's rally, you're handed a shabby broom and a sign to help clear the market debris. You're not alone. Everyone whose day has already gone wrong forms a kind of medieval losers' alliance, sweeping up, swapping stories, and quietly despairing. The cobblestones glisten with sticky patches from crushed fruit and yesterday's rain, and your shoes squelch as you drag the bristles along. The cleanup crew is a kind of motley patchwork. There's Bertram, the disgraced chicken wrangler, still picking straw out of his tunic. Old Maud, who seems to be perpetually angry unless she's eavesdropping, and Tilda the candlemaker's apprentice, her hands more suited to pouring wax than wielding broom. Despite the mayor's urging, only a few townsfolk have the heart to actually clean. Most move slowly, pausing for frequent breathers, like a battalion defeated before the battle has even started. The air is thick with the scent of rotting cabbage and the sharper tang of spilled vinegar. Someone's donkey, left unattended during the rally, has contributed generously to an ever-growing pile near the well, a situation no one is eager to address. As you lean on your broom, you catch Bertram muttering about fate and foul luck, cursing his fortune between sweeps. Maud, meanwhile, has established herself as chief gossip, passing along stories she overhears while pretending to scrub a doorway. Tales of lost bets, the mayor's secret syrup stash, and speculation about who will next earn a stint with the cleanup crew. Every so often, a gust of wind stirs the litter, sending shriveled turnip leaves skittering and undoing the crew's half-hearted progress. The youngest children sneak pebbles into the sweep piles, laughing in muffled giggles at the adults' misfortunes. For a moment, a faint camaraderie forms as Bertram, with mock formality, knights a reluctant Tilda with his grimy broom handle. "Rise, Dame Sweepsalot," he intones, earning a rare grin from the group. Yet, as the sun slinks behind the watchtower, fatigue and resignation settle in again. The sweepers take turns sharing the bizarre misadventures that brought them here. Bertram's ill-fated attempt to train dancing chickens for the festival parade and the chaos that followed. Tilda's candle batch that exploded in a haze of lavender and soot. Maud's accidental flooding of the baker's cellar after chasing a runaway goose. Each tale, told in tones of rueful humour, builds an unspoken sense of solidarity. You realise the cleanup crew is as much a support group as a punishment, a place for the town's accident-prone and unlucky to regroup before rejoining everyday life. As darkness creeps over the marketplace, the job is nowhere near finished, but nobody seems too concerned. Maud offers a round of questionable cheese. Tilda shares a stub of beeswax candle for light. And even Bertram finds a threadbare blanket in the debris pile. Together, you settle onto overturned crates. Someone starts a tune, half sung and half hummed. Its melody floats between the stone buildings, a soft anthem for the defeated. Laughter rises as the crew collectively agrees to blame tomorrow's filth on a passing band of outlaws. When the town crier passes, pausing just long enough to wrinkle his nose at the smell, Maud waves her broom in mock salute. "Keep walking," she calls. "This mess is a work in progress." The crier rolls his eyes and disappears. There's no applause, no recognition for the cleanup crew's effort, but maybe that's its own reward. In a town where everyone's fortunes wax and wane, sometimes the only comfort is sharing the sweep. Eventually, you resume the slow, steady rhythm of broom and scrape, not because you expect to finish, but because, for once, you found good company in the mess. Allies who understand that sometimes the hardest part of cleaning up is simply showing up. Transcript, analysis, storytelling structure, tone, and style. Storytelling structure. Scene-based. Each segment centers around a vivid scene or moment, often with actions or minor mishaps serving as anchors. Personal perspective. The narration uses a direct address, you, putting the audience in the protagonist's shoes. Humorous. Escalation. Everyday frustrations are exaggerated into mini-dramas, with comic setups and punchlines. Vignettes. Each section reads as a lively vignette, self-contained but loosely connected by an overarching situation. Circular callback. Often ends with a wry reflection or callback, closing the scene and hinting at the next. Tone. Wry and self-aware. The voice is knowing, sardonic, and dryly amused by its own misfortunes. Relatable exasperation. Everyday woes are recounted with a mix of resignation and mock heroism. Absurdity infused. Slightly surreal touches, e.g., rats with vendettas, heighten the anything can go wrong feeling. Writing style: conversational and direct. Sentence structure is brisk, with asides and quick pivots to keep pace. Sensory detail: imagery is strong, sharpening the mundanity into comic high relief. Punchy phrasing: short sentences and punchlines punctuate the narrative, maintaining rhythm and engagement. Playful metaphors: frequent use of metaphors and similes adds a cartoonish layer to the ordinary. Second person: address consistently uses you, immersing the reader as the protagonist. As you sweep the last charred onion peel, something small scurries past, suspiciously rat-shaped, with a look in its eye that says, "I'd ruin your day if I had the chance." You make a mental note. Next time, pretend you didn't see it. Ignorance, in this case, is literal bliss. It's not the first time you've crossed paths with this wiry apparition. The plague rat, capitalized, because you're fairly certain it's the same beast every time, has made a sort of cameo career out of haunting your kitchen. You remember the first encounter, a fleeting shadow behind the recycling bin and a tail like a damp noodle, vanishing before you could muster a coherent yelp. Since then, you've learned to spot his signature style. He moves with the cautious bravado of someone who believes himself to be both invisible and the star of the show. He's unhurried, almost taunting. Toast crumbs, please. This is a rat who has seen things. This is a rat who has plans. You consider your options. Scream, tempting, but likely to summon neighbours with far less tolerance for kitchen drama. Chase after it with the broom. Equally tempting, but you recall the aftermath of last time. Clouds of dust, upturned bins, and a strange, lingering scent of defeat. Instead, you opt for measured inaction. The rat freezes mid-glance, as if weighing your threat level, and in that split second, you sense a mutual understanding, an unspoken pact of non-interference. If you don't escalate, neither will he. For now. Still, a prickle of unease settles in. You track its last known trajectory. Under the fridge, naturally. The darkest, most unreachable recesses are prime rodent real estate. Past encounters taught you a painful truth. There is no broom long enough, no flashlight bright enough to truly reclaim this territory. The fridge may as well be Switzerland, neutral, but offering questionable asylum. You try to rationalize. If you don't see the rat, perhaps it doesn't exist. Yet, tiny hints litter your domestic crime scene. A mysterious black speck where no black specks should be. A gnaw mark that wasn't there yesterday. Each is a clue in the ongoing saga, a sort of rodent Morse code spelling out, "You live here, but so do I." You picture the plague rat's origin story, a scrappy underdog from the alley, raised on coffee grounds and misplaced optimism, making a European backpacker's tour of city kitchens. In a softer moment, you almost admire his nerve. Almost. But admiration quickly fades. You have to regain control of the narrative. You Google traps, natural deterrents, humane eviction tactics that involve mint oil and vague prayers. The search spirals. Can rats open doors? Do they hold grudges? Are you the villain in his story? Or is he simply a genre-savvy anti-hero, starring in a slapstick farce you never auditioned for? As the rat's cameo draws to an anticlimactic close, a faint, final rustle, confirming he's taken the hint. Your kitchen returns to relative calm. But the atmosphere has changed. Every twitch of a dishcloth, every hiss of the radiator is pregnant with suspicion. Suddenly you realize, this isn't your kitchen anymore. It's a stage for guest appearances, unscripted plots, and the perpetual threat of tiny, furred saboteurs. In the end, you sweep up the last onion peel and pretend, just for tonight, that you're alone. But both you and the plague rat know the truth. He'll be back, stealing scenes, chewing scenery, and maybe your cereal, a silent star of your domestic dark comedy, and you will both continue this uneasy dance, one cameo at a time. Amid the chaos, you nearly bump into the one villager you wouldn't mind embarrassing yourself in front of. They smile until you realize you have pig hoofprints on your face. Romance in the Middle Ages, about as smooth as a gravel road. But really, can you blame yourself? Just yesterday, you watched this same villager. Let's call them Elfrida, though they'll always just be them in your mind. Charm a horde of geese back into their pen with nothing but a stern look and the promise of old bread. There's something magnetic about them. Maybe it's their effortless competence, or the mysterious way they never seem to be covered in muck, unlike, say, you at this exact moment. Your heart does a little somersault, which would have felt lovely if it weren't jostling up against your bruised pride. You both pause in the muddy lane, inches apart. For a heartbeat, neither of you says a word. The villagers bustling around you might as well not exist. The only sound is the distant clang of the blacksmith and the squelching of your shoes. You open your mouth to speak, a witty, perfectly timed remark about pig racing. A dazzling admission of affection. But all that comes out is a nervous, muddy-sounding Elfrida's eyes crinkle as they try very hard not to laugh. You have, they begin delicately, gesturing vaguely at their own say. A bit of pig. You flush hotter than baked bread, instinctively scrubbing your face and only succeeding in smearing the mess further. Well, so much for dignity. If only you could vanish behind a nearby haystack. Or, better yet, time travel to a future where deodorant exists. Despite your humiliation, Elfrida hesitates before moving on. There's an awkward shuffling. You are certain you can hear the snort of a pig somewhere in the distance, mocking you, no doubt. But just when you're sure all is lost, Elfrida extends a hand. Walk with me? They ask, as if muddy cheeks are nothing out of the ordinary, which, to be fair, in this century, they aren't. You fall into step together along the rutted path, grateful for any excuse to hide your burning face. Conversation is stilted at first, a patchwork of nervous laughter and village gossip, neither of you quite sure which way is up. Elfrida describes the adventures of finding the geese. Apparently, one still refuses to come out of the baker's kitchen, and you recount your epic pig-evading sprint. There's laughter. There's teasing. The world feels lighter, like the sun has chosen this moment to peek out from behind a cloud. It's almost enough to make you believe in fairy tales. Almost. Because then, as fate would demand, reality crashes back in. A shout from the far end of the lane. It's your aunt, and she's brandishing a wooden spoon with the fury of someone who knows how much laundry you've just created. She's here to drag you home for urgent chores, in front of everyone, including Elfrida. You promise, too hastily, too hopefully, that you'll see them tonight at the midsummer celebration, muddy face and all. You manage a lingering look as you're tugged away, Elfrida giving you a little wave. Was it a promise? Or merely politeness? There's no way to know. That's the trouble with medieval love. It moves at the pace of a slow cart, but fate hits you faster than a pig breaking loose. By nightfall, there's still hope. A dance, perhaps, or a stolen conversation by lantern light. You scan the bonfire crowd for Elfrida's familiar face, but luck isn't on your side tonight. Duty calls them away to tend a sick goat. You, meanwhile, are stuck cleaning dishes with your own mother, who mutters on about sensible prospects. Your short-lived love story ends not with a declaration, but a shared, knowing glance across the fire. But if there's anything the Middle Ages teach you, It's that sometimes the messiest occurrences make the best memories. This fleeting encounter, with all its mud, mishaps, and maybes, might just be your favorite story to tell, hoofprints and all. Unfortunately, the town healer catches wind of your curse and insists on a curative concoction. It involves leeches, strongly brewed nettles, and a prayer that sounds like a Gregorian chant remixed by a sleep-deprived monk. You survive, but your dignity doesn't. The healer's workspace is equal parts apothecary, shrine, and, let's face it, haunted tool shed. Dried plants dangle in bundles from the rafters, their labels long since changed from lavender to unidentifiable 3. There are jars of suspiciously murky liquids lining the shelves. One of them seems to blink at you. You consider making a run for it, but the healer, moving with surprising speed for someone dressed in what appears to be 50% burlap, blocks the exit. Tradition must be upheld. And besides, you're told it's for your own good. The first phase, leech application. The healer assures you this is deeply scientific, as learned from a manuscript that survived at least 3 fires and 1 unfortunate goat. You're instructed to sit still while a handful of leeches, who look far too eager, are introduced to your bare skin. The sensation is memorable. The healer hums the aforementioned remix of Gregorian chant, which oscillates unpredictably between reverent and out-of-tune tavern song. Nobody is comforted, least of all you. After 10 agonizing minutes, timed, apparently, by how long it takes the healer's pet cat to complete its evening patrol, the leeches are declared full of unclean humours and dismissed with more ceremony than you expect. You are then offered a cup of something that smells like the aftermath of a forest fire, a brew of nettles, wild garlic, and regret. You try to decline, but the community has assembled in the healer's hut, and their collective stare leaves you little choice. You swallow. The audience is pleased. Your taste buds are not. Then comes the prayer. In theory, it's a holy incantation meant to drive out curses and invite healing. In practice, it's part exorcism, part tongue twister. The healer waves a bundle of smoking herbs in complex, unrepeatable patterns, while chanting words that may or may not have been Latin at some point. The energy in the room is intense, if confused. The healer's assistant looks on with wide eyes, clutching a rag doll for protection, or possibly just comfort. Somewhere about the third sanctus, you start to feel lightheaded. Whether from the ceremony or the nettle brew, or both, it's difficult to say. The healer takes this as a good sign. "It's working," someone whispers dramatically, and the people gathered begin to nod and mutter their own miniature prayers, just in case extra backup is needed. This curative circus continues for some time. At various points, you're dabbed with vinegar-soaked cloth, sprinkled with salt, and asked to produce a lock of hair for good measure. At one point, a rooster is brought in and, after a tense moment, simply stares at you before being led out again. The townsfolk seem satisfied. No one, thankfully, suggests bloodletting. Yet, in the aftermath, you're declared much improved, which is to say, upright, breathing, and only slightly traumatized. The healer, smiling serenely as if this is all in a day's work, accepts a small pouch of coins and a promise to avoid goat herders for the next lunar cycle. You limp away, swearing you'll never complain about a headache again. Still, as you leave, there's a strange sense of relief. Maybe it's the knowledge that you've survived medieval medicine's best shot. Or maybe it's just that, after all that herbal chaos and communal chanting, any other misfortune feels positively reasonable by comparison. One thing is certain: you'll be double-checking your cloak for leeches before the next village festival. Back at home, it's time for dinner. The only thing left is turnip stew, slightly scorched and teeming with flavour notes, best described as regret. You try to pretend you're eating something exotic like the nobles do, only with fewer spoons and more splinters. No matter how many times you swirl the ladle, there's no catching a chunk of anything other than turnip. The steam rising from the pot smells faintly of burnt hopes, and, if you're being honest, yesterday's boots. Across the table, your family eyes, their bowls suspiciously. Utensils hesitantly scrape at the stew, not so much out of hunger, but as a last act of defiance in the face of disappointment. Someone, usually the youngest, attempts optimism. Maybe it's better with a bit of salt, they suggest, although the salt cellar has been empty since Candlemas. A pinch of honesty might have improved things more than any seasoning, but nobody's ready to admit that out loud. So the table hums with the unspoken truth. This is all there is, so you'd better make it last. You consider conversation to distract from the meal. The topics, however, are about as uplifting as the food. Father grumbles about the taxes. Mother mentions the neighbour's suspiciously plump chickens. Someone tries to lighten things up with a joke, usually about last week's stew, which was almost, but not quite, as bad. Laughter bubbles up, tinged with the desperation of people pretending they don't mind chewing the same turnip several times. Still, manners persist even in hardship. You watch as everyone carefully dips bread, so stale it threatens dental rebellion, into the stew, soaking it just enough to render it chewable. With each bite, you try to imagine which noble delight this could be. Lamprey pie? A delicate ragout? Your imagination, unfortunately, has limits. Very clear, very turnip-shaped limits. Midway through the meal, an unexpected crunch, a splinter from a wooden spoon, introduces chaos. There's a brief collective silence, then a resigned acceptance. Adds texture, someone mutters, and the meal carries on, as if chewing wood is simply part of the culinary experience. Outside, night falls. Inside, the candle flames flicker, illuminating faces smeared with the evidence of battle, the orange traces of stew, the grim set of jaws, and those soft, brave smiles you wear for each other. Someone suggests tomorrow's dinner might be better, and everyone nods because hope, like turnip, is difficult to extinguish entirely, however hard you try. Dinner draws to a close with the ritual scraping of bowls. The last drops of stew are debated over, tiny prizes fought for with the skill and strategy usually reserved for chess or war. The pot is declared empty, though most quietly agree it was emotionally empty long before it was physically so. Utensils are set aside, and the table is cleared with the practiced coordination of those who understand efficiency is preferable to lingering over a memory best forgotten. Dishes are rinsed in cold water, every bit of residue hinting at meals past. It is a comfort, in some way, that the stew will be tomorrow's lunch as well, if not in taste, at least in persistence. As everyone prepares for bed, there's a moment of communal resignation and, incredibly, gratitude. The meal may have bordered on tragic, but it was shared in good company. You stretch out on your straw mattress, stomach slightly hollow but heart a little fuller, fortified not by feast, but by the hard-earned warmth of togetherness. Even in the face of dinner disasters, you suspect that somehow you'll get through, and tomorrow maybe, just maybe, find a turnip with less regret and a little more possibility. After a day like this, you need a bath. Unfortunately, the bath is a washtub outside. The water is one step above freezing, and there's a very real danger of getting peeped on by chickens. You question your life choices, but you're too tired to care. As you trudge towards the tub, your aching muscles protest with every step, each one a reminder of the day's chaos. Your clothes are dusted with crumbs from breakfast, and a generous assortment of both mud and unidentifiable liquids. Somewhere between the swamp-like smell and the crunch of hay in your shirt, you realize that city standards of hygiene have grown distant. Now, the only thing standing between you and the comfort of cleanliness is this dubious rural ritual. You eye the wash tub with suspicion. The water, recently fetched from the pump by wielding what is essentially a leaky tin pail, sits cold and menacing. Steam does not rise from its surface unless your imagination is working overtime. You toe off your shoes, noting that your left sock is somehow both completely soaked and caked in dirt, an achievement you would have found impressive yesterday, disheartening now. As you begin to undress, you try, and fail, to block out the shuffling noises behind you. The chickens, oh the chickens, have gathered like a particularly judgmental audience. They're scratching, pecking the ground, and bobbing their heads in that way which suggests not only disapproval, but also a curious fascination about this hairless, two-legged intruder about to do something entirely unchicken-like in their territory. Every so often, a gust of wind sweeps across the yard and turns your anticipated, quick splash into a shivering endurance trial. You contemplate negotiation tactics with the elements. Perhaps, you ponder, if you talk to the wind nicely, it will relent. The wind is unmoved. The water, meanwhile, is unforgiving. Liquid ice, jolting you awake as you force yourself to submerge as much as can reasonably qualify as bathing. Scrubbing begins. You find yourself reciting a silent monologue about the value of hygiene versus the indignity of this ritual. Your hands have never moved faster, motivated by equal parts discomfort and the persistent feeling of being watched from several beady-eyed vantage points. The soap is homemade and somewhat mysterious in composition. It lathers only with forceful encouragement. It smells vaguely of lavender laced with something medicinal, a scent that does little to mask the underlying nature aroma. Halfway through, you slip, almost dunking yourself in the tub. You catch yourself, dignity somewhat bruised and backsplashed. Now, soggy and chattering, you power through the rest. You hear a squawk from behind, a reminder that the world continues, unbothered by your plight. The grand finale of the bath time experience is drying off. The towel, which you suspect was clean at some unspecified time in the past, does its best to absorb the water, if not your residual embarrassment. You wrap yourself tightly, scanning once more for chickens. One struts by, feathers ruffled, as if critiquing your technique. You slip back into your scratchy but mercifully dry clothes and wonder who ever decided that a bath was supposed to be relaxing. There's a new kind of tiredness now, fresh and slightly hypothermic. But there's also a small sense of accomplishment. You faced the wash tub. You braved the barnyard gaze. You did not, despite the challenges, give in to the temptation to simply skip the bath entirely. As evening falls, you limp back inside. Tomorrow the mud, the chores, and even the chickens will still be waiting for you. But for a fleeting moment, wrapped in your not quite clean towel, you feel almost refreshed. Almost. Let me know if you'd like this tailored further, or if you want to add dialogue or additional detail. With most of the village convinced you're a walking disaster, you try to win them back by promising to not touch anything flammable, edible, or alive for the foreseeable future. Results: pending. You spend the next morning lingering at the edges of the market square, arms folded tightly behind your back, as if that alone will prevent catastrophe. The regulars, those who once greeted you with easy smiles, now give you wide berth, shepherding baskets and children to safety. One child, particularly bold, dares a question from behind his mother's skirts. Is that the one who set Old Man Weatherby's beard on fire? The mother's nod is curt, accompanied by a look that says, Don't you dare get any ideas. Trying to appear useful, but inoffensive, you offer to fetch water from the well. When you return, you hand over the bucket as if it holds a sacred relic, and the baker still looks inside it suspiciously, as though it might explode. Undaunted, you embark on a campaign of good deeds, hoping to chip away at widespread skepticism. You repair fences, keeping both livestock and ego bruises contained. You help patch up the miller's leaky roof, though your presence on a ladder draws a small crowd, nervous, skeptical, perhaps anticipating another installment of The Day Everything Went Wrong. This time, you manage to hammer without incident. When you climb down, you are met with silence. Then, eventually, the tiniest nod from the miller. Progress, you tell yourself with forced optimism. It's not all charity work. There's also bureaucracy, penitence, paperwork, and the unofficial Disaster Prevention Committee. They hand you a list of prohibited activities, which includes a surprising number of everyday things. No handling open flames, no unsupervised use of tools, no spontaneous dancing, and, rather unkindly, no experimental cooking. You recognize the writing style, that of the council secretary, whose signature was once in the town's birth records and now appears mostly on warning signs. Unbeknownst to the committee, you seek redemption in quieter ways as well. You sweep the tavern floor after closing, stack chairs, and even learn to play the lute, though you never touch it without express permission. The tavern has been the site of some of your worst moments, but also your most genuine attempts to mend things. Over shared mugs of cider, a few patrons begin to remember that you can be funny in your own self-deprecating, none too threatening way. At least you never tried to juggle the axes. Someone laughs. And, just for a moment, your reputation softens at the edges. Embarrassment becomes a tool in your arsenal. Instead of shying away from your past misadventures, you recount them with comedic exaggeration, letting others laugh with you instead of at you. Who knew chickens and flour could launch that far becomes a running joke, the memory of your greatest kitchen mishap transforming from a cautionary tale into local law. People love a good story, especially when it's not about them. Over time, your determined refusal to disappear begins to pay off. The village, naturally suspicious of abrupt changes, warms slowly. Trust, you realize, is built through consistency. Not grand gestures, but the small things. Returning a dropped scarf, helping the cobbler's son with his sums, listening without correcting. You relinquish your urge to prove yourself all at once and simply show up, reliably, quietly, always, with a sheepish grin at the ready. There's no parade, no ticker-tape moment when you're forgiven. Instead, one rainy afternoon, as you pass the blacksmith's shop, you're invited inside to dry off. Sitting around the hearth, it occurs to you. You're not just tolerated, you're, dare you say it, trusted. Or at least, trusted not to burn the place down. That's reputation rebuilt, one cautious kindness at a time. You crawl into your straw mattress, every joint protesting the indignities of the day. As the candle flickers, very safely, far from anything you could possibly ignite, you reflect. Tomorrow is another day, and maybe if you just lie perfectly still, nothing else can go wrong. Right? The mattress sighs beneath you, a tired, papery sound, as if the straw itself is equally exhausted by your life choices. You shuffle around, searching for the least pokey lump, wishing for clouds of down, but resigning yourself to an endless game of guess that item in the mattress. Was that a stick, a long-lost spoon, or just another reminder that medieval sleep is less about rest and more about endurance? You mold yourself into the most comfortable contortion you can manage, shifting minutely with every creak and rustle. Because, much like the regrets swirling in your mind, the mattress refuses to let you settle. You stare at the warped ceiling beams, tracing the slow slide of candlelight across ancient wood. Regrets tend to march in at this hour, heads bowed, clutching the mishaps of the day like parade banners. You think of the bread you baked, or rather, charred. The slip and splatter down by the brook, still echoing in your shins. The one neighbour you accidentally snubbed in the market, her glare precise as a dagger. Each little memory sidles up alongside you, settling in as unwelcome bedfellows. You sigh, trying to convince yourself that you're not a walking disaster, just a work in uneven, unfinished progress. But maybe tomorrow will be different. Maybe tomorrow you won't spill the milk, or break the handle off the only serviceable bucket, or somehow manage to get chicken feathers in the soup. Protein, you'll say. No one will laugh. Maybe you'll greet the dawn with optimism, or at least with the ability to stand upright. There's a stubborn hope there, flickering just as bravely as your dwindling candle. The hope that you're not irreparably hopeless. After all, persistence is the one resource medieval life can't ration. As you try to tuck yourself beneath a too-short blanket, call it rustic charm rather than threadbare necessity, your mind rewinds to moments that surprised you in their small sweetness. The warmth of a neighbour's smile when you shared a stale crust. The quiet comfort of a dog settling at your feet. Even the rhythm of your own breath, slow and steady, after everything has, at last, gone still. These are the gentle reminders that the world isn't only mishaps and mortification. Sometimes, survival itself is a tiny victory worth honouring. Outside, night slips silently across the fields, blurring the edges of your worries. Stars wink sleepily overhead. Ancient fires that have watched countless other fools, maybe slightly less accident-prone, maybe not, track their own regrets across time. You wonder briefly if they ever got the hang of it. Maybe tomorrow you'll be a little less clumsy, a little quicker to smile, a little more, well, you. You nestle deeper under your blanket, lowering the flame until only the faintest golden glow lights the room. Each breath is a quiet surrender to the day, to exhaustion, to the possibility that mistakes are just the preamble to improvement. In this brief space between yesterday and tomorrow, you permit yourself the radical kindness of letting go. Maybe nothing will go wrong if you just lie perfectly still, you think. Then again, maybe something will, but that's for tomorrow's you to worry about. For now, you close your eyes, letting sleep creep closer, softer than any straw. Tomorrow, with luck and a little stubborn hope, you'll try again. And that, after all, is what nights are for. Meanwhile, your tiny mishap goes on inspiring wild stories, each more dramatic than the last. By week's end, everyone remembers your disaster differently. The fire was either a blazing inferno or just a bit of warm drama during cabbage season. Either way, you're now a local legend. You wake up the next morning, still smelling faintly of smoke and roasted cabbage, only to find the village abuzz. The baker claims he saw towering flames reflected in the church windows, while old Marjorie swears she remembers the heat so vividly, her tea boiled itself right in the cup. Every retelling adds embellishments. A dog heroically saving a potato sack, or mysterious shapes glimpsed in the smoke. Were those spirits, or just the neighbours peering in for a look? No one quite agrees on the colour of the fire or the number of chickens that narrowly escaped, but they recount it with gleaming eyes and grand gestures. Children reenact the scene, substituting their toy wagons and dolls for scorched furniture, and the village gossips are delighted. Your little accident has become this week's hottest entertainment, outpacing even the ongoing debate about whether the mayor's prize-winning pumpkin was truly grown on local soil. By lunchtime, your cabbage calamity has evolved into folklore, blending seamlessly with tales of floods, miraculous harvests, and the infamous goat stampede of '74. There's a curious comfort in the way your story mutates. Details blur and bend depending on who's telling it. If someone needs a laugh, it becomes a slapstick comedy featuring slippery turnips and frantic dashes. If others need a cautionary tale for their children, it's suddenly filled with warnings about unattended cooking and the perils of haste. Your modest mishap now walks arm in arm with the larger-than-life episodes that define village history. As the days pass, you start to notice the ripple effect, how a single, relatively simple incident reverberates outwards, shaping the mood of the community. At first, you cringe to see yourself cast as the hapless hero in every retelling, but gradually, you find yourself leaning into the collective amusement. There's satisfaction in seeing how your ordeal, humiliating as it was at the time, brings people together. Strangers laugh with each other at your expense, for sure, but also with a kind of camaraderie that's rare in the day-to-day bustle. Somehow, the story creates new connections. Neighbours who barely exchange more than a nod now stop you in the street, eager for updates or just to rib you about your spectacular pyrotechnics. Even the stern shopkeeper, usually as unyielding as her penny candy, cracks, smile, and offers you a free toffee for bravery, or perhaps for next time you need to put out a blaze. The village forms a tapestry of good-natured teasing, with you at its centre. You may have begun the week mortified, but by now you see the upside. The way your tiny disaster has woven itself into the village narrative, a thread connecting you to generations past and stories yet to come. The ripple effect is about more than embarrassment. It's about unity, resilience, and the weird, wonderful democracy of storytelling. No one owns the tale, and everyone can add their flavour. Over time, the sharp edges of your embarrassment smooth out, replaced by the warmth of shared memories and laughter. By week's end, the fire's cause is barely a footnote, but your new status as a minor folk hero is assured. Your accident is no longer just yours. It's everybody's new favourite story, reshaped, retold, and relished. So, as you join in the laughter around the tavern table, you realise this is what community means. When your small slip-up becomes something bigger, brighter, and, most importantly, shared. Did anyone learn anything? Maybe not. Livestock are still roaming, soup is still hazardous, and the pigs are plotting their next move. But you? You're a little wiser, a little more careful, and a lot more famous for all the wrong reasons. Let's break it down. The town council, having finally resurfaced from their emergency meeting bunker, announced a brand new list of urgent recommendations. These include timely advice such as always check behind you for chickens, and spaghetti is not a flotation device. The pamphlets were printed, distributed, and instantly repurposed as makeshift hats by the goats on Main Street. So, lesson number 1, wisdom distributed in bulk rarely lands where you want it. Of course, there's the issue of trusting expert reports. The committee assigned to investigate the soup situation concluded with a 3-page summary. Boiling does not always sterilize. Sometimes it encourages. Most residents nodded sagely, then promptly began taste testing their leftovers right out of the fridge. Lesson number 2, institutional memory is short and appetite is stubborn, but it's not all for naught. What the events have done is etch a few non-negotiable truths into the town's collective consciousness. For instance, after the fence incident, everyone started locking their doors at night. A subtle but important upgrade given who, or what, might drop by in the dark, looking for shelter, snacks, or a rematch. If you're still leaving the windows open, well, that's bravery or denial, but certainly not ignorance anymore. Take the pigs. No one trusted them before. Now, trust has evolved into a robust neighborhood watch program, featuring binoculars, state-of-the-art mud sensors, and an enthusiastic shift schedule led by Mrs. Clinton. Not that one. Lesson 3. Paranoia makes for excellent community engagement, even if it means more false alarms and the town choir accidentally singing in the key of oink. As for our hero, yes, you, it's impossible to go through something like this unchanged, even if you'd rather not be the protagonist in a saga of soup, swine, and spectacular miscalculations. You probably know what it feels like to have every move dissected in the bakery, every whispered giggle trailing you out of the hardware store. But you've also become the person who instinctively checks the floor for banana peels, who carries a salt shaker for both flavor and defense, who can spot a shadowy porcine silhouette at 50 paces. That's growth, even if the curriculum was unorthodox. Not everything stuck. The parsnip embargo was lifted after just one day. The no running with scissors while herding ducks rule is observed only in principle, and only during daylight hours. Old Mrs. Doolan still insists her tomato patch is haunted because the tomatoes keep rearranging themselves into rude messages. But everyone knows she just likes the attention. The lesson here, some traditions, no matter how absurd, are as persistent as the problems that spawned them. Yet, beneath all the slapstick, the chaos, and the collective amnesia, there's the tiniest glimmer of something sturdier. Maybe it's resilience. Maybe it's the stubborn optimism that says, next time, it will be different. Or maybe it's just that nobody else will ever make quite the same mistakes in quite the same way again. At least, not until next year's festival. So, lessons learned. The ledger is muddy, the chalkboard half erased, and the teachers left the building. But at least you now know. Fortune favors the slightly paranoid. Disasters are best faced with friends, and some pigs should never be underestimated. Most importantly, the greatest lessons are the ones everyone promises to remember, until the soup pot starts to boil once more. If you have further preferences or wish to guide certain anecdotes or characters, let me know. Happy to tailor it further. At last, in the blissful quiet just before sleep, you realize you made it. One very small mistake led to a series of utterly catastrophic, unforgettable, and, if we're honest, hilarious events. And yet, you're still here, more stubborn than ever. The candle's finally burned out, the pig has settled, with grudging dignity, back in its sty, and the catastrophic soup fire is mere history now, smouldering away with the rest of your day's misadventures. You lie there staring up at rafters surely older than some countries, the scent of wood smoke and singed bread tingling your nose, and start to piece together how survival, in any era, is less about skill and more about improvisation, heroism by accident. You never set out to be the protagonist of a misplaced medieval epic, but when disaster comes hog-rushing down the corridor, you find yourself starring in a slapstick chronicle of creative rescue attempts and last-minute pivots. It hits you how life, then and now, is a patchwork quilt of errors miraculously stitched together by grit, luck, and a sense of humour robust enough to survive the odd chamber pot mishap. Your mind races. Would you have outfoxed that scullery cook or ducked out of the way of the flying mug? Possibly not. But you did survive, if not with dignity, then at least with the kind of story that grows in the telling. There's a comfort in that. Medieval or modern, we are all bumbling through, hoping the universe is laughing with, not at, us. Consider the medieval pillow, a burlap sack full of straw, lumpy in a way that makes your neck question its loyalty to the rest of your body. Still, right now, it feels like a throne. The mattress creaks with every tiny move, a symphony of nocturnal complaints. And yet, these annoyances are small badges of victory, each mark and scratch a remnant of all the near misses and barely managed fiascos that make up a day. In the comforting echo of quiet, broken only by a distant, triumphant pig snort, you reflect on the true joy of surviving, not just avoiding calamity, but finding a punchline in every disaster. The dark is deeper here, where neither street lamp nor foam glow drowns out the stars. You sense the giant machinery of fate rumbling out there in the cosmos. But within your four, slightly skewed walls, you feel a tidy hush. It's not pride in your resourcefulness, let's not flatter ourselves, but in your sheer persistence. Last night, you might have thought, one more disaster, and that's the end. But here you are, surviving the improbable with the doggedness of a barn cat and all the grand wisdom that only near disaster bestows. Maybe, as you lie awake and memories of every clumsy moment crowd in, you even feel a small thrill. There's a giddy ridiculousness to realizing you could have been done in by, say, a soup ladle, gone rogue, or a flying heel of bread, and your greatest accomplishment today was not perishing from embarrassment. Modern indignities, sending the wrong text, burning dinner, tripping over your own shoes, start to feel almost heroic by comparison. The world, after all, is not so different. Then, the threat was plague rats and cold porridge. Now, it's delayed emails and awkward elevator silences. And so, you let yourself smile in the dark. Disaster is inevitable, survival is unlikely, and joy is always, stubbornly, surprisingly possible. As you drift towards sleep, tomorrow's adventures promise new hurdles, none insurmountable when met with the same blend of wit, resilience, and the ability to laugh, especially when things go very, very wrong. If you wake to an untorn roof, an unspilled breakfast, and no urgent needs to douse yourself or the local livestock, consider it a small miracle earned through the simple art of outlasting the day. Sleep well, accidental hero. You've not just survived, you've collected another tale, rib-cracking and full of Pyrrhic pride, to tell by embers glow, one bedtime story at a time. Let me know if you want a specific angle, more dialogue, or even to sprinkle in real or imagined medieval details. So tonight, as you drift off in the gentle hum of modern comforts, no wayward pigs, no errant lanterns, and hopefully no plague rats, spare a thought for your accidental medieval alter ego. Because if history teaches us anything, it's that disaster is always just one tiny misstep away. But so too is the most unforgettable adventure. Maybe the world hasn't changed that much. We still spill things, embarrass ourselves, and hope tomorrow gives us a clean tunic. The difference is, you have indoor plumbing and a bed that doesn't try to bite you back. Whisper a quiet thank you, not just to your ancestors who survived soup-based warfare and pig stampedes, but to yourself for laughing through it all, one bedtime story at a time. Sleep well, outlast calamity, and always triple-check the oven door.